Welcome to Caring Table. I am Diane Frana, your host, having real conversations about real topics, shaping lives in the Lehigh Valley and beyond. Welcome to Caring Table Podcast, Episode 6. Today our guest is Beatrice Karnga Gray from Caring Grace Home Care Agency. This is where I first started with the senior care industry. Welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here, Beatrice. So I'd like you to share with our audience how and why you started Caring Grace Home Care Agency.
So Caring Grace Home Care Agency started from the compassion of caregiving. If you look at my background, where I come from, my cultural background, caring for the elderly is a thing that we do in your family. I'm sure we all do that here too in the United States, but we don't have non-medical home care services because family does the caring. So it's something, it's intrinsic. Caring was a hard desire to do. So when I came to the United States, I started working as a caregiver. And I love working as a caregiver. And because I wanted to see that progress and to give quality care, I decided to establish Caring Grace Home Care Agency. At first, I was working, in corporate, and I just decided to do something different.
May I ask where you come from and your culture? Can you go in detail about your culture?
I come from Liberia, West Africa. It was African culture, of course. I come from the Bassa tribe, and we speak dialects. We also speak English, So I've been in this country for almost 40 years. I spent most of my adult life in the United States. So I am in both places, both Africa and United States. Yeah.
And you never know when two people meet where it can lead 20 years later. When Beatrice and her family moved to Whitehall, and James was a new student in the 8th grade, and he was in my daughter's class, Caitlin. That's when they became friends. From 8th grade to high school, and at James's high school graduation, we were invited and we went there. Mind you, my daughter didn't want me there. But James called me that day to make sure I show up. When we were at the party, I asked Beatrice what she was doing, and she shared that she is starting her own home care business. At that time, my father was diagnosed and was given a prognosis of 3 months to live because of his congestive heart failure. And I was going back, at the time I was in education, so I was going back to my job in August, not knowing who could be there in little time frame increments to care for my dad and just assist him. He didn't need medical care. And I said, would you be interested? And that's how it started. My father was one of her first clients. He was with Caring Grace from August to December is when he passed. And the care that they provided was amazing. Fatu was his caregiver. And my father was a very strong-willed, independent man, and at 75, unfortunately, it was his time with his heart failing, and he wasn't ready for it. Fatu made my father enjoy the last several months of his life. I called it, like with the Grumpy Old Men, the movie, a bait shop in Northampton, no longer around. She would take him and drop him off, and he'd sit there and he'd talk with his friends because he no longer could drive. And in order to keep him living the life he was living, but still have his independence, meant the world to him. So knowing that care that they provided for him was somewhere that I would be interested in working. And from there, I started working with Caring Grace part-time in the summer and then during the school year, then became full-time. Fast forwarding to now, we are friends and continue with the friendship and in the business. And it's all just because two people met, Caitlin and James, who are still friends as well. But providing care for someone and genuinely them experiencing that person cares about them was what I take away from the care that was provided by Caring Grace. And that's what the agency Caring Grace provides. And that's because the passion that Beatrice has for it, being in the field and wanted to provide quality care. So Beatrice, you have been in business how long now?
12 years.
12 years. So what do you contribute to the success of your business?
Well, first, if you have the heart to do the business, if you don't look at that as a business and you look at that as a moral obligation, and if you also have the vision and extend that vision to your caregivers, to the business, the culture, if it becomes the culture of the business, then you can remain in business despite the financial aspect of it. If you have people who come into the business who actually know that caring is a thing to do, even if you're not in a business, you see someone who's in need, you will obviously want to care for that person. So that's the message we send out there. And one of the challenges that the non medical home care agency face is that it's hard to retain caregivers. So if you cannot retain caregiver, obviously you're not going to provide the services that you need and you're not going to get more clients. But you retain those caregivers and you make them understand why they are with the business is to care, to understand why they're caring, to take care of someone who's looking up to them, to care for them. If they grasp that concept of caring and they have that compassion and true love and respect for the person, you can retain them because they understand why they do what they do. It's not just about the paycheck. So those are some of the things that we have and we talk about in our business. Of course, non-medical home care agencies struggle, when it comes to finances, but it's how you handle your finances and things that you do. But it's a great business because like I said, the moral aspect of it drives me to keep going. I'm just grateful that I could do that. For the past 12 years, we have served so many seniors and disabled people. When I look back, I feel so blessed that I was able to do that.
So let's go back to the pandemic time. How did you survive the pandemic?
Oh my God.
At that time, I was full time with you. So we were still going to work in the office.
Yeah, we were going to work because again, the goal is to care. You cannot stop caring for people because there's a pandemic and needed to be there to care. And we had to communicate a lot. It was a different kind of time. We had to make sure families were okay, those who were caring for our seniors were okay. So we pushed ourselves and we did what we had to do, even if we had to dress up like we had on all the gear, all these things, all the PPEs.
Yes.
So it was very costly. We had to buy those things, but we had to focus on care. We were able to survive it. We lost some of our elderly, sadly, those who were still strong to withstand COVID, and the caregivers, we had a lot of caregivers who had COVID as well. But thank God that a lot of them survived it and they still push on to care.
I remember us preparing like their little gift bags or care bags.
Yeah.
The
Hand sanitizer.
sanitizer, yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the mask, and we would provide that. But that was important to them. And it's building the relationships with the family, which is what Care and Grace does. It's not just like they're a client. You get to know them. And over the years, you've had clients for several years. Yes, yes. The caregivers, right, the turnover and things. So that's important too. So why do you think that is possible that you're able to keep them for several years and the workers?
Taking the services we provide, the services actually caring and not going in to do a work or going in to build a business. Like I said, the vision is to care, and we truly believe that. We believe that it's a moral thing to do. We stress that to the caregiver. So when they go in, they know they're there to care for somebody. So that was ingrained in them. So we were able to accomplish that.
From previously, we used to do, and this was pre-COVID, that we did training in the office for the caregivers because they're all required to maintain a certain amount of hours yearly. So what type of training do you now provide for them?
The state of Pennsylvania has about 16 different training topics that the caregiver should have. Competency training that is mandatory that a caregiver have. And then going forward, Caring Grace will also look at the caregiver's ability, where they're lacking, or if there's something new that they need to know about. We enforce those different trainings, that the caregiver would need to be trained on, things that they would need to be trained on. But the 16 core trainings come directly from the state, the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Office of Long-Term Living. In addition with our training, when we see a caregiver lacking in an area, we must train that caregiver to know exactly what they're doing.
So, what do you think is different about your agency compared to your competition? What would you say stands out that makes Caring Grace successful for 12 years?
It's how we embrace the work we do, how we truly enjoy what we do, their commitment of the caregiver, their compassion. They truly have that, and I think that's one of the driving force that help us to sustain ourselves where we are. Most, you know, I would say businesses or agencies probably they focus more on the bottom line first. But our focus is not the bottom line first. Our focus is the care that we give. And I think that have sustained us and also forming a team of caregivers. Like if we go to the home to do an assessment, you have to know the family dynamics and you have to understand who you're sending to that home. Understand the family dynamics. You don't just send any caregiver because you want to cover a case. You have to understand that you are going into a family and you have to make sure that when you're in that family, you know what caregiver you're sending to that family so that they will, know the family dynamics and blend within that family. And that has helped because if you send the wrong caregiver, not the wrong caregiver, but someone who doesn't blend with that family, obviously you keep sending caregivers and sometimes you lose the kids, or the services that you provide. So we really pay attention to the family dynamics and make sure we send the right caregivers to those families.
Today's episode is brought to you by Lifestyles Over 50, Northeast Pennsylvania, a regional magazine connecting seniors and their families with senior housing, assisted living, wellness centers, local health care providers, healthy living activities, and community events. Learn more at l-advertising.com/lifestyles. The trend is for people to age in place in their home. Some family members have either been able to retire or maybe stop working to be home with them, but it's also important that they are able to take a break and have time to themselves. And that's where a home care agency can come into play and assist. Not that they have to be the primary caregiver, but also being there with the family and giving support. Certain appointments to go to, or say 3 times a week they want a break for themselves, where you can come in and support that as well.
Yes, it's respite care that we provide, and we've done that for many family members. It can be emotionally draining too if you're there as a family member actually caring for an aging or sick loved one. It does have some emotional toll on you, and the family probably would need a break or vacation. And then caring grace will come in, if it's 3 days or a week, whatever time that family member needs, you know, to give them that break, or even if they want to take care of themselves, physically, mentally, whatever they want to do, we come in and we help with that as well.
A lot of times it's hard for someone to realize that they want or need the care. What is some of your suggestions for the family or for people themselves as far as when is it time for them to have care come in and assist them?
With the families, it's tough because sometimes the person who need the care will not at that time understand that they really need the care. The family also is not ready to have another agency come in or someone else to come in to provide that service. But when you see an aging family member at risk in the home, if they're not taking the medication or if they're leaving the stove on, things like that. If you see that a couple of times or they're being forgetful, the family member will try to identify those things, that are risky or posting the elderly family member to some kind of danger. And at that time, I think it's a good time for the family member or the power of attorney to start thinking about bringing in someone in the home to really monitor that person and make sure they get the services they need and the assistance they need.
Is there a minimum? Are there minimum days or minimum hours for one of your workers to provide care?
Normally, the minimum is 3 days, 3 hours a day, or whatever the family like. Is very flexible. Everything is actually up to the family member. The agency does not impose on the family member. The reason why 3 hours or 3 days is the minimum because that's when you really can be effective in giving care to that person for the person to receive the best of care. It takes about that time, because when you're in a home and you're going through their daily routine, the daily way of life, you need at least 3 hours to really, really give good care to that person. So that's why we think 3 hours is the best time.
Would you suggest when family members or a loved one sees someone declining, but it's not that they need care every day, but occasionally to start small? And this way they would be more open when they need care longer and more times?
I would suggest that they can start small. They can also identify what kind of care that will benefit the family caregiver that's declining, whatever area they need that care, so that we can come in and help, in that area, of care, be it, to do meal preparation or maybe to help, to assist with grooming or dressing, things like that. If they're slow at it or they're not taking care of themselves, you know, I suggest it's time to come in and just help with that.
Usually the client who needs the care, they're the ones that are pushing back more because it's losing their independence. And also, there's not planning beforehand. And I'm more proactive than reactive. So you like to look into the future and say, down the road, we may need more care. We know mom or dad want to stay in the home. So a suggestion would be, let them start now with 3 days a week, 3 hours a day if they can, to get them accustomed to it, knowing that they do need assistance to make sure they're eating their meals and their laundry is getting done and things like that.
I don't think they should push them. They should not be pushed. Communication is good. I think a family member should actually communicate with their elderly loved one exactly what they're doing because you may think as a family member that you need to provide or bring in someone to provide services or care for your elderly loved one, but your elderly loved one is not thinking that. In their head, they're still capable. They are not at risk. Like you said, they are afraid of losing their independence. And you still have to look at them as if, they're still 20, 30 years old, had the same capacity they had when they were taking care of themselves. You have to look at that. You don't just look at them because they're elderly. So you come in and you don't tell them what to do, but you work with them. You ask questions. Mom, what do you think about this? Should we do this? What do you think? Should we bring this person in to at least help you with this? So you talk in questions. You ask questions.
Yes.
You don't tell them what to do. Then they would think that, oh, you're my daughter or my son. Why are you telling me what to do? I'm the parent.
Yes.
So that's where the confusion comes from. Why is she telling me? Why are you telling me what to do? I'm your mother.
Yes.
Yeah. So you ask questions, you bring them in the conversation so that they can still feel that they're in control.
One of the struggles that I had with my father was the fact that in his mind, he is my father, I am the child, and I should not be the one taking care of him because he's the one that's supposed to be taking care of me. And that's where we had the struggle, but the adjustment at first when I said that someone does have to come in, not that you can't do it, Dad, we just want to be safe. When Fatu was there, that's what she provided, conversation with him and easing him through the process. And I know from my experience, not providing the care opened up more communication and things that I found out about my father that I didn't know. We had time to enjoy each other's company and discuss those things. Now, one question I have, do you provide transportation with your service with Caring Grace?
Well, we don't have a transportation system, but what we do is when we have caregivers, they can provide the transportation to take the client to the hospital, or if they want to go to the beauty salon, do the hair, or go to the grocery store. They would take the client. Or if the client have their own transportation, the caregiver can opt to use that if that's okay with the client. Some have public transportation, that they use. The thing is when the client gets into the public transportation, it has now become the responsibility of that company, that transportation company, to actually make sure the person is safe. But caregiver can still go along with them.
And that's important, and that's why I asked that. I know when we did have a client and one of the caretakers when I was working with Karen Grace, it became her shopping buddy, and they would go shopping,
Yeah.
and they enjoyed each other's company, and that was someone who was a widow and wasn't out of her house since her husband passed away, so it was very nice that they were able to provide that, and that's giving them back their independence, just like Fatu taking my dad to still go sit at bait shop and sit there and they all griped, the males.
They
You
really
know?
bond with them. Yeah,
Yes,
they
yes.
bond with them. That's why it's important. One of the things that some families need to understand is that when a caregiver comes in the home, give them time to bond with your loved one. If you do not give them that time, and if something goes wrong, let's say the food wasn't cooked right, or it wasn't done the way your mother wanted it to be done, to be cooked, just give it time, because if it's their first time coming in, they have to get used to the routine of that elderly person. When they grasp that and they connect and get bonded and they bond to that client, I mean, you can take that away. Even if you don't need them, you're coming to check because they have that bond with the person. I have a caregiver who, unfortunately, one of her clients she's been with for a very long time passed. And I was in the office and she slammed the door open and just went flop on the floor and she was crying. And I was like, "What happened? My client, she's just," she called the client in, "She's just died." She was so emotional because she had bonded with her so much, and we both just started crying in the office. So that's how it is. It's important to let them bond with that person.
What I want to clear up is with Karen Grace Agency, you have a team of caregivers that go to a client. It's not that you have someone every shift, someone different. You build a team for a client, which is very important.
The team mostly depend on the hours that is authorized for the client. If you have a 24-hour client, of course, you're going to build a team of maybe 4 to 5 people. If you have 8 hours, you're doing 3 people just in case you need to cover for another person. So, but it's a team of people that is known by the client and the family.
So, do you offer live-in services?
We do offer live-in, yes. Some family would need live-in if the client is in the home and they feel that the client is at risk and they cannot be at home alone over the time period, 24-hour time period, and they want the person to really be there for them, especially when a family member of power of attorney is not around or is far off, far away, maybe in a different state or, a different place, and they don't have time to come in. They would say, just we need a live-in service, to make sure our elderly parent, is secure. So they provide 24-hour and they are obligated to provide living space for that caregiver as well.
And then does that caregiver get time off? How does that?
Everything is like a team. So you get another person who will come in to cover for that caregiver, of course, because every caregiver needs time off.
Yes, yes. So, when you calculate the monthly cost of that, does it total more than going into a community or less than a community?
It depends. The live-in service, the cost is different set of costs. I think it's on a flat rate. Everything depends, but it's less. It's less. So if you need a 24-hour nonstop care, you can pay hourly because it's not billed hourly.
Mm-hmm.
It's billed per day.
Right.
Per day or per week. So if it's hourly, it's going to be way more. It's going to be probably 2 to 3 times the cost.
That way, it is allowing the loved one to stay in their home instead of going into the community, and maybe the location is best for them.
Right, right. Most elderly, choose to live in the comfort of their homes. The moment you take them out of there, you face the challenge of trying to make them comfortable somewhere else. So they choose to stay in their home unless they have to leave to go and be monitored medically. Then they can leave their home.
And these are conversations that family members, or if they don't have any family members, their power of attorney should approach and have this discussion before it's an emergency,
Right.
and to know what their requests are.
Right. It's important to have that discussion before you need a care But sometimes, family members are basically going on they have their own lives. They're taking care of themselves and their family, so they don't think about those things until, and if mom and dad still doing good, you don't think about it. Or sometimes health emergencies happen. Even though they're elderly, they're still strong, they're still going about. But then when health emergency happens, then that's when family members will have to make decisions, for care.
My father lived 25 years with 20% of his heart. He was then taken to the hospital because he was having complications, and he did have a mild heart attack. So I find out when I'm getting ready to leave work from my uncle, because my dad was supposed to go pick up his older brother. He's like, "What's wrong with your dad? He's in the hospital." And I had no idea that he was even in the hospital. So I went to the hospital to visit him after work, and I remember walking in the room. And at that point, they spoke to him and said that his heart was declining. He was down to 5% of his heart functioning due to congestive heart failure. And I remember what my dad said to me, and it was, "I don't want to die in the home. I want to die in my home. I want to be at home. I don't want to be in a nursing home. I don't want to be in a personal care." So I know as his daughter, in my mind, when he said that, I was going to do whatever I had to grant him that wish, to have that wish and make it possible. But at first it wasn't easy because he did move back in his home by himself, and he shouldn't have been by himself, but he was then put on hospice, and he had a great team taking care of him. I loved his case manager, and that's so important. And then I remember it was a year later, so he already outlived his prognosis by 9 months, and then he fell. And with that fall, that time from the hospital, they said he can no longer go home. So I left work at lunchtime. We came home, and I was very fortunate to have a husband at that time that was very adjustable and adaptable. And we made my daughter's bedroom into his bedroom because she was away at college. And we made the adjustments that we had to. That's when Karen Grace came in, then within 2 months. That gave him longer life, I feel, because he was living with us with congestive heart failure. And then it gave them more time. And sometimes they don't realize that. Just the little help that comes in from the family and from someone else, them not making their meals, them not taking a shower. Because my father was capable of making sure he's taking his medication. It was just having the strength because of the heart condition. I experienced that with him, being able to keep him in his home where he wanted, and that was his wish. Now, with my mom, we're experiencing Alzheimer's, where that's hard to care for someone or have care in the home. And unfortunately, but fortunately, she is in a community. That's where she's safer. But you have to look and research and find out what care they want before they need the care, just so you're aware of what your loved one would prefer and what their wishes are. But it's being prepared, knowing that there's agencies out there that provide non-medical care, come into your home and help you assist with your loved one.
Well, caregiving is about still maintaining the quality of life for that person because you're taking care of doctors and nurses and mothers and fathers and teachers and people who really helped strengthen community and did all they could. If you keep that in mind as a caregiver or a family member, some family member maybe when the person is elderly now and you see as a role reversal, but look at it in a different way. You're looking at your father still, even though he may not be in the fatherly role to tell you what to do, but he is still your father. She is still your mother. As a student, he's still that teacher. He's still that pilot. If we look at that, if you still look at those people, the elderly people, in that view, which there still are, then you can give compassionate care that everybody needs.
Well, thank you, Beatrice. We enjoyed this episode, and a lot of takeaway from this is important. Again, it is communication and always remembering who they were prior to their situation now.
Exactly. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and you will be back. If anyone listening has any questions or input, please reach out to us. Listen to our podcast, Caring Table, on YouTube and all other major podcast platforms. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.